Howdy, folks. Humanities 2, Shasta College. Have you guys got the book yet? That's what it should look like. Volume 2. That's important um, because Volume 1's too soon. Yeah, and this is the 7th edition, by the way. You can get these online somewhere at your local rental places. It's going to help to have it because I follow the book as we make our way through the history of humanities through the century, the last 500 years. So hope everything's going well with you folks out there. I'm going to sign a paper probably tomorrow, your first essay, and we'll talk about that more, what I expect. And I'll put all the details. You'll be okay. You'll make it, but be prepared to do some research and some good, creative, honest writing without any plagiarism. Of course, you would never do such a thing. Anyway, we're in a really interesting time in history. Before social network, before cell phones, before electricity, before everything that we know. But there was still a lot of ideas going on, and this is a great era for the blossoming of free ideas. Things are getting more people are learning how to read. The printing press has been invented so people could print things out. They used to have to write everything out individually. That's how you got things in those days. If you want a copy of something, someone had to write it out for you. Now they can print it out for you. That is changes the whole atmosphere of information and creativity and philosophy and music and art. It's a rich 100 years here, 1500 to 1600 or so. And we're going to just cover a few today. And then I'll post a documentary or two. I hope you saw some of the stuff I posted yesterday. Always check out announcements every day and look at modules because I try to find brief documentaries that kind of explain what we're doing, where we are. Yesterday, I posted one about philosopher, a great philosopher, Sir Thomas More, who had a really interesting history. He wrote Utopia, um, which was a groundbreaking, revolutionary book. He was a clergyman who was very high up in Henry VIII's cabinet, and he really believed in the power of faith and the power of the individual staying true no matter what. And when Henry VIII got to a point in his life where he wanted to divorce another wife because the wife had not produced a male heir, he wanted a divorce. Well, that was a no no, folks. The Holy Roman Church would not allow a divorce. And that's who would allow the divorce. And Henry essentially broke away later and formed the uh, Catholic Church, but the London from the Great British Church instead of listening to Rome. He created his own so he could get his divorce. So it was a very selfish act. And Thomas More, who had been his close advisor and a trusted friend, and who had wrote this book, Utopia, about this kind of idealistic community, is a fiction book, folks. It didn't exist. Utopia is a Greek word that kind of means a couple things, but one of them is a good place. One of them is also no place. Think about that. Utopia doesn't exist, essentially, um, except for in your imagination. And it was very structured, a very long piece of writing um, about who does what in the community, um, everybody's place in the community, everybody has a certain amount of freedom. He's not a feminist, folks. He wants that woman in the kitchen and pregnant. Uh, but uh, but the idea, a lot of it was quite outstanding, and nobody had read anything like that before or imagined a world like that before. And even Henry was impressed. Well, when Henry wanted this divorce, he needed Sir Thomas More to sign off on it and say, yes, we're going to break away from the church. And he said, I couldn't do it. I believe in the Holy Roman Church, and I don't think this is a good move. And you should stay with this woman. You're married to her, you know. Well, they put him on trial and they found him guilty of treason and they lopped his head off, folks. Yes, he was executed by having his head chopped off. Henry VIII was not a person to go up against. He executed a lot of people, including his wives, folks. Anne Boleyn, he cut her head off too because he was only married to her for about 3 years and she didn't have a male heir. Couldn't get a divorce, cut her head off. Good guy. You don't want to be married to somebody like that ever. So he was an important philosopher, and once again, because the words could be mass produced and the public was learning more and more how to read, it had a great effect on the culture. So check out that little documentary I posted yesterday in modules. Another person uh, who you'll probably have to write your essay about. Might as well get ready for it. I'll post it, but I won't post your essay till tomorrow because I don't want to do it tonight. Um, is another person who had a great effect on the world culture. Um, his name was Martin Luther. No, folks, not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther. Was once again a very religious man, very pious man, but he did not agree with the Holy Roman Church, and he wrote and broke away from them. And he wrote um, some new laws, what he thought should be effect about how we conduct our religious lives. And the church did not agree with any of it. They put him on trial for for going against the church, which you could be executed for. In those days, the church was not fun guys to mess around with. They had their own army, by the way. They weren't peace-loving Christians, folks. They controlled people through war and might. And if you futz around with the church in those days, you could get executed or tortured or both. He went against the church, but he wasn't executed. And now he is known for starting the going against the Catholics and essentially starting the Protestant religion, which covers everything that's not Catholic in this country. We're not talking about Islam or Buddhism or Judaism. We're talking about Christian based on the Catholic Church. And there's a church they named after him, the Lutherans. That's where it comes from, folks. You'll probably be writing your first essay on that. We'll see what I feel like doing tomorrow. Anyway, I'll talk about the essay in detail, not tonight. What do I expect? A lot. I just don't want you to go to Wikipedia and regurgitate information. That's not what I want. I'll probably assign a documentary for you to watch, and I want you to interpret what you're seeing. And always essays will be about why this person matters. Why did Martin Luther matter? Not when he was born or who he was married to or when he died, but what made him matter to the entire culture. He still matters to this day. That's how profound his effect was on our culture. This era of the Renaissance was flourishing because of new ideas, radical thinkers, dangerous ideas, because a lot of times they went against the status quo and it was looked down upon. It took a very strong man, a very strong person to go up against these powerful institutions. It took someone who believed so honestly that is willing to sacrifice their lives. And some of them did. Sir Thomas More was one of them. And then, besides on that, the philosophical bent of the era, the Renaissance that was happening, was flourishing through Europe because of trade coming from all over the world into Europe. And so there was money to be had. For the first time, people had leisure time, even though it was rough, and they could buy goods and services like they never could before because perhaps they had the income. And so it was a good era to live in. Still, life expectancy was low, folks. Still, no modern medicine. You could die from anything that gave you an infection because there was no antibiotics, there's no penicillin. And so the average lifespan, early 40s, was considered old. Lots of deaths in childbirth because there was no modern medicine. But there's starting to be modern plumbing, and that really started the road to health. People started living longer because they weren't living in their own sewage. I know it sounds simplistic, but it's a fact. Um, these are game changers in our history of our culture. Nothing much is happening in America because we've just been kind of we're getting just started, and so nobody is setting the world on fire yet. Here, that happens once we go through the American Revolution. We're not there yet, folks, by about 200 years. So everything is European centric, I should say. Just going to end this on possibly the greatest writer in the history of writing, written word. Maybe you've heard of him, William Shakespeare. Maybe you think of some play you possibly read or saw in high school, Romeo and Juliet, which is not one of his best, in my opinion, and others. I'm not the only one who agrees with that, but it's one of his more popular one because it's so easy to understand and digest, and that's why so many high schools require it or they perform it. But he wrote some devastating plays from Macbeth, King Lear, Midsummer's Night's Dream, to Hamlet, perhaps the greatest play ever written. We're going to talk about it in detail next week because your second essay will be about William Shakespeare. But I want to give you guys some good groundwork on that. There's a really excellent documentary about Will's influence on the world, and you're going to need to watch it. He's in our lexicon. We still use his language, and you probably use it and you don't even know what you're saying, where it came from. You might know what it means, but where did it come from? And it'll be taken from one of his plays, and you'll be surprised. But one of the greatest lines in history of Spoken words was spoken by Hamlet, to be or not to be. Maybe you've heard of that. What do you think it means? Well, we're going to be talking about that in depth next week. This week, we're going to be on our first essay. I'll post the documentary to watch tomorrow. It'll probably be due in a week. You'll have a week to do these papers. Plenty of time to do the research. Don't wait to the last minute. I always tell when people do that, and you're going to rush through it. I want to see a coherent, well written, well thought out piece of critical analysis of an important human being that still affects the world to this day. Then there's an artist, painter, Hermanus Bosch. Maybe you've seen his work. I'll post a little documentary on him. It's some really wild stuff. When you look at it, you think, wow, did they have LSD in those days? Well, no, not really, but they had stuff. Believe me, they had mushrooms and other things to kind of get the brain going in these interesting directions. And when you look at his literally surreal and yes, psychedelic paintings, you've probably seen them, probably don't know what it is. I'll post if I can find one, brief documentary on him on modules and Canvas. I'll post that later on tonight. And please take a look at it because we're going to start talking about painters also. We're going to talk about in this class, we're going to go from painters to writers, composers, musical composers, literature, playwrights, fine art, everything that makes us who we are in this world. And how important it is and how important it still is. That's how important these figures were. And we're standing on their shoulders. You are standing on their shoulders. I am standing on their shoulders. And you may not even know it. Hopefully, by the time we get done with this class, you'll know it. You'll have some context to the shoulders you're standing on. See you next time.